A first ball in Ashes test can be weird. You're probably not visualising Stan Worthington at the Gabba when thinking about it. But this just shows how far back that kind of weirdness goes when it comes to the first ball of the Ashes. Of course, since then, we've seen Steve Harmison bowl to second slip, Michael Slater slash Philip de Freitas to the fence, and Rory Burns, dancing past the first ball. So Zach Crawley entered that company with his first ball from Pat Cummins. It was quite a start to an Ashes that was already bubbling over the edge a little bit. So to have this with the whole Bazball background and Australia just winning the World Test Championship certainly juiced Edgbaston up just a little bit. It was a startling moment and also a really poor ball from Pat Cummins. A surprisingly bad delivery that was very wide. And really all Crawley had to do was step into it. But there was a little bit more going on to this first ball as well. Australia had started with 3 slips and a gully, so quite attacking from that point of view. But also a deep backward point, which didn't actually work as the ball went squarer and still made it to the boundary even with someone out there. But altogether it was an impossible moment to ignore, and it would be easy to overanalyze a first ball of the Ashes. It's something that has actually happened quite a few times before, thanks to Harmison, de Freitas and Burns. All of those moments led to England losing. But Stan Worthington's complete arsehole of a shot didn't even lose England that test, although Australia would go on to just win that series. The point is that we often look at what happens early as a sign of things to come. But if you go back to the 2010-11 Ashes, Andrew Strauss was out from, the third ball of that game, and England still easily bossed that series. So we have no idea what Crawley's first shot might mean for this series. But we certainly know what it means for cricket right now. England are warping Test cricket. And remember, Australia knew it was coming, and Crawley still hit a boundary. And by the third over, Australia had 3 fielders out on the boundary. Not because they were trying short balls, just because they were preemptively assuming that England would score a lot from these shots. And England did make 18 runs off the first 3 overs, pretty much with those fielders out anyway. And there were many bizarre moments of this day, like when Scott Boland was bowling to Zach Crawley quite early on in the day, and Alex Carey came up to the stumps. In the first morning of an Ashes test? Like, if you look at that old video, even Bert Oldfield was standing back when Worthington played his stupid hoik. You don't see this much, but in the world of Bazball and the Bazball shuffle, everything is now on the table. When Lyon got on, it was even odder. There was a moment where it was genuinely hard to tell if the fielders hadn't realised there was a bowling change or not, because everyone was just kind of scattered and looking around to see if they were in the right position. Lyon had fielders at long on, deep mid-wicket, deep square leg, and also a deep backward point. It really did look more like a mistake than what was a proper test match cricket field. And it got weirder just after, because Smith moved out of slip into a position that could only really be called a reverse sweep gully. But if you do have a better name for it, feel free to put it in the comments below. But here is where it got very fun as well, because Australia kept sledging Pope like they still had 8 hairy-lipped men around the bat, not just Marnus behind his hip and everyone else on the boundary. It was sledging with sweepers. Oh, and on Australia's weird fielding position, it's worth mentioning that when England bowled to David Warner, they also had something that could only be called a fly gully. Again, feel free to come up with a better name in the comments below. It is possible that today was so weird that we created 2 new fielding positions, the funkiest gullies we have ever seen. And stuff like that kept happening all day. Crawley played an extraordinary shot at one point where he made 3 bold choices. The first was to come down the wicket as Boland came in. The second was then to walk across his stumps a little bit to the offside. And when Boland saw him and delivered the ball a little bit wider, he decided to just ignore what was going on and flick to the leg side anyway. He would miss the ball. Actually, he didn't actually miss the ball. He edged the ball behind, and Australia missed the fact that he edged the ball. And that, of course, was the headline. But the guts of what had happened there was absolutely remarkable. Crawley had made 3 bizarre attacking decisions in one delivery. This is just one story of many. By the 15th over, there was only 1 slip in for the seamers. This was in England, on the first morning of a test match with Cummins, Hazlewood and Boland in the attack. But the weirder fields that we saw were not just about the shots, it was also about the pitch. Stokes had ordered Bazballian wickets, although chances are that this one was slower than anything he ever would have wanted. There was still just about enough juice in the wicket for some proper Bazball shots, like when Harry Brook got a short one outside off stump and decided to try and hit a 6 over point from Boland. Instead, he spooned the ball up in the air, and Head didn't actually pick it up off the bat, and eventually when he did get to it, he dropped the chance. This shot was very New England. But what happened next was almost as interesting, because Head was moved from deep backward point, and he was replaced by Marnus Labuschagne. Head is not a great fielder, although he does move pretty well in the outer. But usually, putting him out at deep backward point shouldn't really cost you all that much. But why did Australia make that change? Because they wanted a better catcher at deep backward point on day one of a test match. Think about that for a moment. In cricket, you get your best fielders into catching positions. Apparently now that is 55 metres away, sweeping on the offside boundary. Things done changed. Australia's fielding positions were just very different to what we are used to. They had an in-out field all day long. England didn't score their boundaries like they usually can in full pomp, but they did find singles pretty much all the way through. For many English players though, that wasn't enough, and a lot of Australia's tactics worked pretty well. But for one player, it was his dream. Joe Root is the best single scorer in world cricket, and Australia set up fields to allow him to make those singles all day long. He started with men out at point, so he just kept dropping the ball on the offside and running. Later on, he'd bat with Ollie Robertson, and Australia moved to the kind of field where you put everyone on the boundary while the tail end is at the other end, and instead of just blocking 4 and then looking for 1, as most batters would, Root just took everything offered to him by the Australians. Then when he got to 99, with Lyon bowling to him, Australia kept all their fielders out on the boundary again. I mean, Joe Root did not make his 30th Test 100. He made his 17th ODI ton. And the final oddity of this fucked up cake was when Ben Stokes declared to bowl a few overs at Australia, despite the fact that Root was still collecting his singles and every now and again a few sixes as well. But let me explain this day as best I can through one moment. At one stage, Josh Hazlewood was bowling to Joe Root with a slip and gully in, and then he also had the deep backward point all the way back on the boundary, a little bit finer than they had been at other times. Smith had spent a very long time trying to convince Cummins to bring that fielder in, and you could also hear Marnus on stump mic saying he's getting singles too easily. The fielder out on the boundary also seemed to dissuade Root from playing his reverse scoop, which he would play later on with a slightly more conventional field. Quite often in the history of cricket, bowlers have overpitched or left holes in the field to allow batters to go after. You might take out your cover fielder or bowl some wider length balls to try and tempt them into a drive away from their body. Bowlers do this kind of thing all the time. That's a fairly normal thing in Test cricket. But there was a time on day one of the Ashes Test where I wondered if Australia's best chance would be to bring deep point up into the slips and bowl a dry line outside off stump to tempt Root into an ill-fated reverse scoop. That was the kind of day this was. Crawley's shot may not tell us the future of this series, but it showed us exactly how much England had bent Test cricket.